are listening to the Jboy Show, your number one source for Auburn and the SEC.
My goal was to run through his soul and grab his heart when I run through his soul.
Kurt, Nate, Coach Dab. Those are memories.
I think we've established ourselves as, I think, the premier conference in college football.
Now, the SEC is better at the top. It's better in the middle.
The Southeastern Conference remains the premier conference.
Now takes the snap. Looking for the receiver. He's got Lutz and Kirkland. Touchdown, Auburn!
Think about it. It's always been the SEC and everybody else trying to catch it.
I think this is probably the best league from a competitive venue standpoint.
Most capable teams. You just look at those programs, the way they recruit, how they invest.
Snap to Burrow. 3 steps. Fires. Back corner of the end zone. Over the shoulder catch. Did he hold on? He did. Justin Jefferson. Touchdown, Tiger.
And now, your host, Jboy.
Excited to be joined by a guy that is very well known around many circles in the SEC and in 247 at Auburn Undercover. That's Brandon Marcello, national writer for 247. Now, Brandon, I really appreciate you joining us, man.
Yeah, no problem. Happy.
Yeah, and I don't want to put you on the spot. You know, I don't want to get too personal, but I do want to say congratulations on your new gig, man. That's a big deal, and I know a lot of people are excited, and I know you're excited to be able to really get out there on a national level and show your stuff, man.
Yeah, it's exciting. I just wish I could travel and go develop some new sources without having to just rely on the phone all the time. But it's exciting, but more than anything, I'm ready to get a football season here.
I'm with you, man. And kind of in that realm and talking about that situation, Brandon, really, what do you expect? And I know this is obviously a hypothetical, but what do you expect college football to look like this season?
A lot different, and it's going to be one that's going to maybe change week to week. I think there will be a season of some sort. I think worst case scenario, there's a season that's delayed until the spring, maybe. That's worst case scenario in my mind. But it's going to be one where obviously things in the stands are going to look a lot different. I just don't see how you even have 50% capacity in stadiums. I think it'll be more around 33% or so, 30%. And then on the field, it's just going to come down to a situation week to week where you might see some, teams go, we've got 25 kids infected and 12 of them are starters and we don't feel comfortable playing this week. And so we're having to cancel our game against Georgia or whoever. And then the question becomes within conferences is that a forfeit? Is that a no contest? Do you try to reschedule it in December, like during the first week of December, and push back conference championship games? And then the same goes for non-conference games. Do you cancel when you cancel those? Are those no contests, et cetera, when they're going between different conference lines? So this is going to be something that every week there's going to be a new issue that pops up, even if we do start the season on time. And for anybody out there that can predict what actually is going to happen, that person's a time traveler, because no one is going to be able to tell you exactly what's going to happen this year. It's going to vary state to state. It's going to vary college to college. It's going to vary conference to conference, and no team is going to be the same in how they handle things.
Yeah, and again, every year everybody talks about depth, how important depth is. Well, this year depth may be the most important thing, because it's not just who the second guy is, it's who the third guy is and who the fourth guy is, because God forbid you have a week where, the starting quarterback and the backup quarterback both test positive and can't play. You got to have an answer for that. And I'm very interested to see the teams that lack depth at the most important positions, obviously being quarterback, center, somebody that touches the ball every play. I think that's going to be interesting. But Brandon, when I look at the SEC, and I do want to narrow the focus kind of a little bit. And assuming we are playing, obviously, you know, you had your top 10 players coming out, a lot of Alabama on that list. Do you feel like, again, going into it this year that, you know, Alabama is the team to beat in the whole league, not just the West?
Yeah, in fact, I think Alabama's going to smack people around this year. This is going to be a bit of a revenge tour for them. They're deep everywhere, pretty much like always. But, you know, last year, what really held them back, everybody talks about Tua getting hurt near the end of the year. That's not really what held them back. What held them back was their injuries up front along the defensive line, and especially at linebacker. That front seven was really just debilitated for a lot of the season. And now that those guys are healthy, and if they can stay healthy, that defense is going to be a lot better. I mean, Alabama finished 13th nationally, I think, in scoring defense last year, which is pretty good, but it's actually the worst defensive season in the last decade for Nick Saban at Alabama. And, you know, they get back to the top 5 where they're always at. They would have been a championship caliber program. I think they certainly probably would have won the SEC last year if they were able to knock off LSU. But unless there's just one of these years, you know, where there's an LSU type that has like a once-in-a-generation type of team that no one's really able to touch because of some special players like a Joe Burrow, I think Alabama's going to run away with it in the West, and I think they also knock off Florida, not Georgia, in the SEC championship game and go to the playoff.
Yeah, Florida's my pick out of the East. My one question about Alabama, and you know as well as I do, Brandon, everybody that's listening to this, they are going to have as talented of players on the field as compared to anyone. And that's not a question. That won't be a question as long as Nick Saban's there. I'm just wondering up front on that defensive line. You do have Dylan Moses coming back at linebacker, coming off that knee injury. I expect him to be, I don't know, at the level he was because people just operate differently coming back from that. I never try and project that. I have to see it. But I look at their defensive line. They lose 88% really of their quarterback pressures off a defensive line that was good, but like you said, wasn't nearly what Alabama was used to. And I think, you know, they didn't have a Quinnen Williams. They didn't have a dominant guy. And again, they have, you know, Evan Daniels, guys like that can step in and do it. They're just unproven. But again, they're as talented, Brandon. You hit it right on the head. I mean, you look in the secondary, you look at Patrick Surtain, all those guys that they have, there's no reason why they're not going to be at the top. My question for you, and I think this is the most fun argument coming out of the SEC this season. You may disagree with me. I think the East is going to start trending toward Florida this year, and I think the next couple years. I think Florida will win the SEC East this year. I think Georgia will take a step back. Do you think Georgia will take a step back because of the quarterback position?
Yeah, that's the number one reason why I've got Florida winning the East this year is because of the quarterback spot. I think there's way too much hype on Jamie Newman, the Wake Forest transfer. And it's simple for me. I just look at his stats. Everybody looks at his stats overall, and it's like, wow, that's great. But if you look at what he did against teams with winning records, it was below average to maybe average at times. He threw almost as many interceptions as he did touchdowns against teams with winning records. His completion percentage was below 54%. You take those numbers out, he's got like Joe Burrow type numbers, but those are against really terrible teams. And to me, against teams with winning records in the ACC, those are still not SEC quality opponents. And I understand he's playing for Wake Forest. They don't have the type of offensive weapons that a top-tier ACC or SEC team like Georgia will have. But he did have 2 pretty good receivers and then still did kind of well without them when they were injured. But whenever he played teams with winning records, he looked average to below average. And I just don't see how he comes in and even with as a veteran and comes into Georgia and all of a sudden he's like a world beater and he's better than Jake Fromm. I don't see that this year. And I think they're going to take a step back at the quarterback spot this year, you know, and with Kyle Trask coming in after replacing Felipe Franks last season and performing the way he did, he was second in the SEC right behind Joe Burrow in a lot of quarterback categories last season. I trust him more than I do Jamie Newman. And for that very fact, I think Florida will knock off Georgia this year. Now, as far as beyond this year, I think Florida's got to recruit better to be able to knock off Georgia, you know, a year from now, 2 years from now, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the window for them to beat Georgia is this year. and maybe they can use that to propel them on the recruiting trail. Because right now they're like top 10, top 15 recruiting, and Dan Mullen has never been a elite recruiter, and that's probably because of his assistants he usually has. He's probably one of the best coaches in the country, if not the best in the SEC outside of Nick Saban, but they've got to do a better job recruiting to be a championship contender every year.
Yeah, and again, maybe this is the year where they use that springboard to, convince recruits, hey, we can run with Georgia, because Tennessee's trying to prove the same thing. I just think they're too far away. But, I asked the question when speaking to Jamie Newman, if he was still at Wake Forest, is anybody talking about Jamie Newman? That's the way I look at it.
The only people who are talking about him are the pro scouts. Yeah. They're talking about him being maybe a day one guy, maybe an early day two guy in the NFL draft. They're not talking about him being a star in the ACC that lifts them to 10 wins or whatever and challenges Clemson. He's not going to be a guy that is going to necessarily elevate a college team to the point of winning a championship or contending for one. He's one of those guys who has this raw talent that the pro scouts fall in love with, that they'll give a chance or whatever. And maybe it's not necessarily as successful as he is in college, but maybe find some success later on in his career in the NFL. But I just don't see it happening at Georgia this year after what I saw against, good to, above average teams last year in the ACC.
Yeah, me and you are in agreement on that, and really kind of shifting more toward the West here. There's a few teams that people are projecting to do some things. Texas A&M is one of them. LSU is going to be ultra talented. They lose a lot, but with Ed Orgeron there, the way he recruits, the momentum that they have, they're going to be right there in the fight. And then you look at Auburn, Brandon. When you look at Auburn going into this season, what do you see just overall from a bird's eye view?
Well, to me, there's a few questions for me with Auburn. Number one, the offensive line. I think that'll come together. Something will come together there. But the other big thing for me is Bo Nix's receivers and that passing game have got to get a lot better this year for them to take the next step and be a championship-level program. It's about time that with all those talented receivers that they play the part and look like a top 3 bunch in the SEC. I'm not convinced that's going to happen. They've got the talent. I just need to see it happen. Does Chad Morris, the new offensive coordinator, change that, or is it more of the same, the passing game? And can Bo Nix not escape, the pocket a little bit too early and then kind of negate half the field or whatever when he doesn't have to as a quarterback? So Bo Nix has got to take a step forward. Those receivers have got to take a step forward. And then they got to take a step forward just with from a passing scheme standpoint with Chad Morris calling the plays. Then my other concern is the defense. I'm not so sold on that defensive line being able to reload and be anywhere near where they were last year. They're going to be really strong at linebacker. They'll be okay in the secondary, but that defense is probably going to take a little bit of a step back, maybe be top 30, top 25 in the nation. And if they want to contend in the West, that would mean that their offense is going to have to become a top 10 offense this year. And that's a lot to ask for an offensive line with 4 new starters, a new offensive coordinator. They haven't gone through spring practice. There's a lot of pressure on those receivers and Bo Nix to kind of get things done for them.
Yeah, and when you're looking on the outside, obviously guys, like Shedrick Jackson have to come on. You know what I'm saying? You can't just rely on freshmen to come in and play. You got Eli Stove, a guy who's done it out there, and a few others, but you don't want to rely on true freshmen to come in. They got a few that could help. I know they're excited about a few, Kobe Hudson being one of them. But, you started out, to me, it always starts up front and on that offensive line. Not having the spring practice, as you mentioned, I think was killer there. I do think they'll be fine. I know they're excited about Big Nell and the energy that he's bringing. My question to you, Brandon, it's the $1 million question with Auburn offensively, is will Malzahn actually give Chad the keys? And what I mean by that is not will he let him call most of the plays. What I'm asking is, do you think when it comes down to it, Auburn versus Georgia, or let's say Auburn, North Carolina, week 2, it's 4th and 2 in the fourth quarter, Auburn's got to get it to win the game. Is Chad Morris calling that play?
Oh, that's a good question. I think anybody's guess is as good as mine on that, because I don't know what to expect from Gus in that situation. I think he's going to be heavily involved either way. Whether he actually calls the play or not, I don't know. I think he would give Chad Morris probably the benefit of the doubt early in the season before he starts getting more involved if things are struggling. I think he's going to set up Chad Morris to be successful and for him to fail on his own if that happens too. It's interesting. I live in Arkansas now, and I live just a few miles away from the University of Arkansas campus. And it's amazing to me, like listening to, Auburn fans were pumped that Chad Morris is coming in, but their big concern is Gus Malzahn meddling with it. The Arkansas fans here are like, Auburn's offense is going to be terrible this year. I mean, that's what they're all saying. It's like they don't like his play calling. They don't think he's consistent at all. He calls some really strange stuff. But my whole issue is with that is, Auburn's offensive talent's about 20 times better than anything Arkansas had last year. So even a bad play necessarily turn out good for Auburn. But we'll see. I think Gus will give Chad full control, but the moment it starts going south or he's not happy, he'll take over again. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind he's done that before, and why shouldn't he? He's the head coach, and I mean, Nick Saban does the same thing with the defense when things are going south, and Dan Mullen, I mean, he does the same at Florida. I mean, really, he's the offensive coordinator right now. I mean, no one really even messes with him. And I remember covering him at Mississippi State, and he allowed Les Kenning at the time call some plays and deal with stuff, and he just pretty much shut him off on game days at times and was very public about it. I mean, if you're a head coach and you've got a big background as a coordinator in your past, and that's what you made your money on, and that's how you became successful, you're going to, quote unquote, interfere on game days, no matter what. And I know fans seem to think like, well, that's why we lost because Gus meddled with it. That was a Gus play. And it's like, you know what? Those plays and everything are things that worked and got him to where he is today. I don't think necessarily just hiring a different offensive coordinator is going to change everything. Players win games, coaches lose them. Yep. And certainly you could say, hey, Gus, maybe he called this play and that caused us to lose. But I'm trying to think in my 7 years there covering them, a play that I went, wow, that play lost Auburn that game in the clutch. I just can't think of one.
Yeah, and again, it's something too where you always talk about identity. Obviously, with Coach Malzahn at Auburn, you're always going to have that run first, set up the pass mentality. We got to be able to run. It's just their lack of the ability to be able to get 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2 by turning around and running the inside zone or being able to line up and run the power. And I think that's why you see that Auburn's trying to sign these bigger offensive linemen so they can start making their layups again. And you're not in 3rd and 7, you're not in 3rd and 8. Now Bo Nix doesn't have to sit there and play against 2-man because that's what Bama does. And if you watch Tennessee, that's what they do. When they get you behind the sticks, they're going to line up in 2-man and just spy your inside slots and make you throw it outside. So there's another team, Brandon, and I really want to get your take on this because I'm not sold on them. I just feel like it's clickbait, and I hope you disagree with me. It'd probably be a pretty good conversation. But Texas A&M, man, everybody talks about Kellen Mond. I just think until he develops touch, until he develops the ability to throw the corner, until he develops the ability to time up the deep ball, it's going to be a revolving door of Texas A&M winning a game or two they shouldn't, but losing games that they should win, especially at home. Where do you see Texas A&M going into the season? Is this the year for Jimbo, in your opinion?
Kellen Mond is yet to come up big in big games. The marquee win for him was beating LSU 2 years ago in overtime, and that was a controversial finish. You look at games like that Clemson game when it came down to the end, but they still didn't come through. Even the game against Auburn last year, that was something that Texas A&M should have been in, and then they start coming back, but by then it was too late. I mean, they were down double digits. I don't trust Kellen Mond to be the type of quarterback that can throw a 65-yard bomb to all of a sudden be a game breaker and game changer. He's not consistent. And at this point in your career, heading into your final year, if you have not hit that mark yet as a junior or a sophomore, what makes you think they're all of a sudden going to hit it this year? I mean, some people will automatically go, well, Joe Burrow. Like, listen,
That's a different story.
A lot different. Yeah. Much different for a lot of reasons. Joe Burrow was not going to class because he just did like one online course and was pretty much treating it like the NFL. Had a private coach off campus. He barely even went on campus other than for practices. His life was all football, and he had the raw talent to be able to go that and mold it, and plus an incredible coordinator to help with the passing game in Joe Brady. Kellen Mond has a great quarterback coach in Jimbo Fisher. He's the quarterback whisperer in my mind. There's two of them in the SEC. It's him and Dan Mullen.
Yep.
But I just, with Kellen, I don't see him coming up in big moments. He's yet to do it. I don't think he's going to do it this year. And with the games on their schedule, I just don't see him coming up big in the fourth quarter to be able to get Texas A&M over the hump and being able to win more than, say, 10 games. I think they could win 10 games this year, but to be a championship team in the SEC West, you got to win 11. And I don't see them doing that.
Yeah, and again, everybody talks about Mond in the offense. Defensively, Texas A&M's got to start stopping people consistently. It's been something where, they'll come out hot early, and then all of a sudden they just can't stop the run. It's something I think if they can give him some help on defense, obviously it'll help, but I'm right with you, Brandon. I'm not sold on Kellen. I don't think he's going to make the jump that people are predicting him to make. And as we kind of wind this down here with 247 national writer Brandon Marcello, is there a team, before I ask you the one national writer question I was going to ask you, I do want to ask, is there a team in the SEC that you don't think people are really talking about right now that may surprise some people this fall and maybe steal a few they shouldn't?
Well, Kentucky, for one, they're going to be a borderline top 25 team in the preseason polls come out. They will. Their offensive line is going to be stellar, and I just wonder about the quarterback spot, though. They're going to be good. I think that's a team that could potentially challenge Tennessee for the third spot. Tennessee's the other team. I think that's the whole thing, is like who's going to be that third team in the East, which in the past, the third team in the East was just mediocre. But now with Florida and Georgia battling it out, that third team is pretty good in the East to me, and is probably about on the level of the third team in the SEC West. It's much closer than it used to be. Mm-hmm. So I look at those teams. I look at Tennessee and I look at Kentucky. Now, as far as a team that I think would kind of surprise people and be like, oh, I didn't see that coming, I think Ole Miss. I think with Lane Kiffin coming in, I think with Lane Kiffin coming into a team that ran the ball so well last year because of Rich Rodriguez's system, which always produces really great running game. They didn't have much of a passing game at all last year. And a lot of people assume that's because John Reese Plumlee, who splits some time there at quarterback, he's a dual threat guy, but he doesn't throw the ball a lot. And when he does, it's usually short stuff. I think he is a much better quarterback than people think. I think he's a future superstar in the SEC.
Wow.
A guy that's going to win Ole Miss some games. And with Lane Kiffin coming in, revamping things a little bit, building off of their foundation of a strong run game and improving that passing game with receivers like Elijah Moore, who needed to be more involved last year, I think they're a team that can not only get to a bowl game, but maybe upset a team or two and then winning 8 games.
Wow. And again, as you mentioned earlier about what the 2020 season is going to look like, man, if you're right on that, I'm going to start thinking you're a time traveler, Brandon. But that's one I'm very interested to see the dynamic between Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach. I think that is a story in the SEC that is going to be very fun to follow. I think it's going to make the Egg Bowl way more of a big deal than it has been in the past. So you're right now, if you had to pick who's going to have more success, let's just say within the next 3 years, are you going Lane or you're going Mike? Looks like you're going Lane.
Yeah, Lane. And the big reason for that is I think Lane can have success easier earlier. Mike Leach is going to take a few years with that system, that air raid. He's got the quarterback, I think, this year with KJ Costello, but he doesn't have the receivers, and they're going to have to build that up over a few years. I compare it a lot to what happened at Washington State. It took a couple of years for that all to catch on and for them to actually start winning. They'll put up big numbers in the passing game. They'll probably be top 10 in the nation in passing, but they're just not going to be able to beat a lot of teams. And I think they'll fight to be bowl eligible this year at Mississippi State, but might actually miss out on it a little bit as they adjust to that new offense. But I think Lane Kiffin in the next year or two, they'll be able to have more success early. And Mike Leach is going to need probably 2 to 3 years to get his system completely in place where he feels comfortable with his receivers and his offensive line.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. I agree with you. And my one national question, looking outside the SEC, Brandon, outside of the Southeastern Conference, can you give me, and I know there's a lot of teams, that's a loaded question, but is there one team out there outside of the SEC that you think really has a shot? I know you got Clemson. Let's just say outside of Clemson and the SEC, who's your favorite team going into this next season?
Ohio State. I think they're actually going to win the national title this year. I think what they've done, since the Urban Meyer era and Urban leaving, they were kind of unfocused at times. And Ryan Day came in last year, and they were super hyper focused on the season, and that's why they just beat up. I mean, they obliterated people last year.
Brandon, they did. I watched them. They did.
Yeah, and so they lose to Clemson in a close game in the playoff. And I've got to think that with the way Ryan Day had them focused last year, they're going to use that with so many returning pieces on offense to kind of refocus again and be just absolutely hyper-focused on the season. But for me, the game of the year in the country is going to be Ohio State at Penn State. And I think the winner of that game could very well win the national championship. Penn State will have less of a chance, but Ohio State's just built to win a title this year. Clemson, I think, is the most talented team in the country, but I think Ohio State, with the coaching they've got, Justin Fields, the pieces returning on offense, I think their offense has a chance to be more explosive than Clemson this year. And not just because Clemson doesn't have Justin Ross coming back at receiver because of his injury, but I just think Ohio State's got it all right now. I think they're going to be more focused than anything Clemson will be able to provide, and that's because of Ryan Day. I think he's a tremendous coach in getting that team focused and really just super sharp on game days.
Yeah, and they're so talented, especially at the skill positions. Oregon's another team I think I'm interested to see how they kind of come off of that big year last year, kind of getting a taste of that. They've kind of changed their identity. They're able to just line up and pound it a little bit with Mario Cristobal. But, Brandon, I really appreciate you joining us, man. We got to have you back on as we get closer to whatever this season's going to look like, man. And tell everybody where they can find you and how they can get a hold of you.
I'm on Twitter at @bmarcello, and you can read my stuff and all of our stuff at 247sports.com.
Definitely, Brandon. Well, I really appreciate it, man, and hopefully we talk soon. And stay safe out there in Arkansas. Hopefully you can hit the road here soon, dog, and get out there and get national.
Will do. You too.
All right, buddy. See ya. That was 247 national writer Brandon Marcello. I really appreciate him taking some time to kind of talk about the landscape of the SEC a little bit outside of it. You can really kind of tell where everybody, the momentum is going right now is toward Alabama and toward Florida. A few, very interesting quotes in there. Thinks John Reese Plumlee is going to be a superstar and thinks Ohio State's going to win the national championship. Again, it's something where the season's going to be crazy. Hypothetically, you don't know what it's going to look like. But again, I really appreciate you guys joining us. Appreciate Brandon joining us as well. Remember, you can find us on Twitter at The Jboy Show, on Instagram at The Jboy Show. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast. Really appreciate you guys joining us for another week. Got a big week. Got Chris Gronkowski, Rob's brother, former NFL player and winner of Shark Tank, joining us tomorrow. Then Wednesday, we have our normal recruiting deal this week with Tay and Eli Gravitt. And again, guys, it's something to wear at the end of the day. You got Stan White on Thursday and you got Dr. Tremedier on Friday. It's going to be a good one. And we got a huge announcement going into next week. Again, I know it feels like we're making huge announcements all the time, but that's good because we are. So again, thank you guys so much. Keep telling your friends. As always, shout out to the Investor Brand Network, the best people in PR and marketing. You can find them at ibnsports.com. And remember, Faison in the studio, always doing his thing, the master chef of the mic. And we really appreciate him. So again, it's been another edition of the Jboy Show featuring 247 national writer Brandon Marcello and Jboy's going. Jboy is gone.